Let us sing his song for the turning of the world, that we may turn as one. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our turning. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our turning.
Let us sing his song for the healing of the world,
that we may heal as one.
Every
Voice and every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our healing. Every voice, with every song, we will move the world along. Yahoo! With every voice, every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our healing. For the loving of the world, let us sing his song. For the loving of the world, that we may love as one. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our loving. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along. Yahoo! With every voice, every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our loving. Up and sing the loving again. Let us sing his song for the loving of the world, that we may love as one. With every voice, with every song, we'll move this world along, and our lives will feel the echoes of our loving. With every song, we will move this world along. With every voice, song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our love. Have a seat, friends. One more. A little earlier in the yesterday, we sang this prayer for peace in 3 languages. We'd like to repeat that as a way to center in and be ready to hear from our beloved friends.
In Arabic, Hebrew, and English, peace. Assalam shalom.
Assalam shalom. Assalam shalom. Peace to my brother, my sister, my neighbor. Assalam shalom. Assalam shalom. Assalam shalom. Peace to my brother, my sister, my neighbor. Assalam shalom. So be it.
Amen.
Well, thank you to the Strathdys again. We just really just so appreciate your music and bringing us together and awakening us. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We just had a wonderful Shabbat service, and this is Shabbat with the setting of the sun, and the light of God enters our lives now as we take this sacred time together. I'd like to make sure everyone silences your cell phones. My name is Don Wagner. I'm the program director for Friends of Sabeel North America, and just a little reminder for that. Our format tonight is we're going to have two speakers, but only one is here. This was to be a dialogue, but we will live in our Palestinian friend will appear very shortly. So we'll just begin in good faith, and we want to stay right on time. So the dialogue may be a monologue. And the audience, however, can create the dialogue session. The format's going to be, in fact, he is just walking in. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Not too much embarrassment. Okay. The format tonight's going to be that each of our speakers will have 10 to 15 minutes to do a presentation. Then we'll sit and have an exchange between us at the table about maybe 15 minutes, and then the rest will be open to the audience. And what we're going to do is ask you to write your question while we're at the table. A little cards or sheets will be passed down, so write your question and bring them up, and we'll just cover as much as we can until it's time to bid the evening farewell. Okay. So our first speaker is a good friend, Rabbi Alissa Wise. Rabbi Wise is the director of organizing for Jewish Voice for Peace, and they are doing a bang-up job. I keep saying in Friends of Sabeel, we look to them of what we want to be. Are the fastest growing, I think, organization, they are the fastest growing organization on Middle East justice and peace in the U.S. And of course, the Gaza attacks accelerated. How many new chapters did you? 25 new chapters since the war in Gaza in August. I should say the massacre. She spent over a decade in New York with Jews against the occupation. She worked in the West Bank in organizing, and before training for the rabbinate, Alissa also worked as a tenant organizer with the Fifth Avenue in Brooklyn. She served with the Jewish Service Corps, and as a rabbinical student, Alissa was education director for Jews for Racial and Economic Justice in New York, and she graduated from the Reconstructionist Rabbinic College in Philadelphia in 2009. There she received the Rabbinical Student Association's Kuttab Award for her work with Palestinian communities. That is Alissa, and more will come. Jonathan Kuttab will be our second speaker. We have been friends for over 30 years. That's why I can make fun of him in public. As a Palestinian attorney and a human rights activist, he grew up in Jerusalem, studied in the U.S., graduated from University of Virginia Law School, spent a couple years on Wall Street, and he's a member of the Bar Association, get this, New York, Israel, and Palestine. He was the founder of many human rights organizations, co-founder of Al-Haq, founder of the Institute for Palestinian Prisoners, chair of the board for the Bethlehem Bible College, evangelical roots as a Palestinian. He was head of the legal committee in negotiating the Cairo Agreement in 1994 between Israel and the PLO. He's been active with Sabeel, and you can really say he was one of the co-founders of Sabeel from the beginning. He's very active with the board at the Bethlehem Bible College and with Christ at the Checkpoint. So there are his evangelical credentials as well as his main line. He's in both. So let me invite Alissa to come first, and then Jonathan. You'll each have 15 minutes, and then come and join me at the table. So let's welcome them.
It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. So as a young girl, I attended a Jewish day school in Cincinnati, Ohio. The bus I took to school was shared with the local Catholic day schools as well. I didn't ride that bus for very long. After a few months, some of the kids on the bus started to tease me, asking if they could see my horns. I was quite naive about what that meant. I thought they were just being silly. Today, I know a bit more about the history of anti-Semitism in the Christian world and the wrong-headed myths about who Jews are. At that Jewish day school, education about the Nazi Holocaust was a centerpiece of our learning. In high school, I visited Auschwitz, Majdanek, and Bergen-Belsen concentration camps with my Jewish youth movement. We were told stories of how the Christian world was complicit in Nazism and their crimes. I sobbed and wailed at each visit to the camps, horrified and disturbed. I knew that my life then would be about interrupting today's violence and hatred however I could. In my 20s in rabbinical school, I was inspired by the White Rose, a nonviolent group of Christian Germans who organized against Hitler's regime. My first year in rabbinical school, I adopted as my spiritual mentor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor, ethicist, and activist who was to me the embodiment of a spiritual leader. He was someone with vision, courage, passion, clarity, and purpose. The model of both the White Rose and Bonhoeffer, that of those who benefit from the systems of power and oppression they were actively opposing and resisting with their lives, continues to feed me in this work. As for you, my Christian counterparts, I see you all working hard to get out from underneath the history of Christian violence against Jews, and I know that our work together as Jews and Christians to stand with justice and equality for Israelis and Palestinians is central to our ability to navigate the internalized messages of guilt and heavy conscience. As a rabbi working to support the Presbyterian Church USA's effort to pass a resolution calling for selective divestment from companies that profit from human rights abuses in the occupied territories, I have been engaging with Christian counterparts in deep, conventional ways. For my part, I am continuing to unlearn the legacy of trauma that I got growing up. Messages like, "No one will save us," or "We're all alone in the world." Those dead-end ideas can lead to behaving out of a place of vulnerability rather than hope and resilience. Through our work together, I'm learning to undo those messages. By a raise of hands, how many in the room are familiar with the claim by some large Jewish institutions that critique of Israel is anti-Semitic? How many of you feel like those charges have been made against you falsely? Many of us, Jews and non-Jews alike, have had accusations of anti-Semitism lobbed at us for standing up for justice, equality, and freedom for all people. We all know there's a conscious strategy that has been developed by large Jewish institutions and Israel itself to attempt to blur or even completely erase the lines between Israel and the Jewish people. I want to be clear that there's nothing anti-Semitic about criticizing Israel or standing up for Palestinian human rights. There is nothing anti-Semitic in the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions to pressure Israel nonviolently to allow Palestinian basic human rights. That being said, when I get asked by people, what do I do to deflect these accusations of anti-Semitism, I do caution people to ask themselves if they are in fact anti-Semitic. I don't know. While there is nothing inherently anti-Semitic about critiquing Israel, that does not mean that you do not harbor anti-Semitic sentiments toward Jews. You're more vulnerable to these attacks if you have not interrogated that within yourself. This is something worth exploring personally as well as in your congregations or organizations. As with all oppressions, anti-Semitism manifests institutionally. In the US, up until the 1970s, there were quotas about how many Jews were allowed into US universities. Oppression develops interpersonally, like ideas of Jews are greedy, rich, controlling, all-powerful. Oppression manifests internalized. These, like some Jews, believing that they need to act out of a place of fear and vulnerability, like the messages I expressed earlier. Anti-Semitism, just like other forms of oppression, lumps all Jewish people together and assigns us a set of characteristics. They can include rich or stingy or even smart. No matter if they are positive or negative, being lumped together is dehumanizing. That includes the idea, as Yafa said earlier, that all Jews are implicated by the deeds of the Israeli government, or all Jews support the deeds of the Israeli government. But, and here's where things get complicated, that notion can be turned on its head because Israel specifically defines itself as a state of all Jews in the world, rather than a state of all its citizens. Israel itself may be, in fact, the greatest contributor to that fallacy. To complicate things further, while critiquing Israel is not anti-Semitic, for some Christian Zionists, supporting Israel is. Apocalyptic Christian Zionist John Hagee was recently quoted affirming that he does indeed believe that Jewish people are going to burn in hell for all unless they abandon Judaism and convert to Christianity. There is hardly a more anti-Semitic notion than that. And this example illustrates, while anti-Semitism certainly does still exist in the here and now, as John Hagee reminds us, it has largely lost its power, at least in the United States. I'll need to hear from you about your experience in Canada. It does not keep us from jobs, schools, access to health care, housing, or positions of influence. In other words, Jewish people are not impeded in any material way from pursuing the life of our choosing. Anti-Semitism has been cyclical throughout history and deeply connected with other systems of oppression. Anti-Jewish sentiment has always served the interests of classism and white supremacy by placing Jews as middle agents and scapegoats for the crimes of the ruling classes, thus obscuring the structural nature of injustices. While the recent attacks in France are sobering, we have not seen personal violence against Jews in the US, and I don't believe in Canada either. Yet there are still occasional outbursts against Jewish targets that help keep Jewish fears alive. And despite the lack of structural barriers for Jews in the US, we still live in a society whose dominant culture is Christian. Many Jews in the US and Canada still very much feel like the other in society, as do other non-Christian people. These feelings are real and not easy. So it's a balancing act of being sensitive to Jewish history and trauma without pulling punches about today's reality. Jews in the US have more political, economic, cultural, and intellectual status than perhaps ever before. The Jewish narrative is still about vulnerability. Part of the work that we as progressive Jews at Jewish Voice for Peace are doing is to take responsibility for challenging that narrative. It means that we all collectively need to be able to hold simultaneously the idea that anti-Semitism in our society is still real, if not very potent at the moment, and at the same time, recognize and fight how accusations of anti-Semitism are being used as an effective weapon to silence debate on Israel. In the US, we are up against attempts to recodify definitions of anti-Semitism based on the European Union definition that would encompass advocacy to hold Israel accountable for its violations of Palestinian human rights. This represents a scary and dangerous development, and if successful, formidable obstacle in our movement of nonviolent activism to ensure Palestinian human rights. A bill was recently passed by the UCLA student government along these lines. The lawyers at Palestine Legal Support have said this about the proposed legislation making its way through campus and statewide legislatures. The definition is so broadly drawn and its examples so vague that any speech critical of Israel could conceivably fall within it. Likewise, any criticism of Zionism, which questions Israel's definition as a state that premises citizenship on race, ethnicity, and religion, is considered anti-Semitic under this redefinition, because such speech can be seen as denying Israel the right to exist as a Jewish-only state. Legislating a new definition is a new tactic that is evidence of the desperation of those fighting against the growing strength of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. In light of these efforts, it is all the more critically important to speak out. For those of us who are Jewish in the movement, we strongly feel the obligation, both strategically and morally, to speak out when false charges of anti-Semitism are used to tar the movement. As Jews, we often find ourselves in a position of privilege in this realm. Partially, this is because Jews can be more effective at rebutting the accusations of anti-Semitism, which can paralyze BDS efforts, and partially, our overall place in society and our perceived connection to Israel gives us greater credibility by society at large than Muslim, Arab, or Palestinian people speaking about their own experience. This is troubling. At JVP, we try to use our privilege strategically where we can. For example, there's a reason why it was useful for the conference organizers to have the JVP Rabbinical Council issue a statement of support for this conference. But we also try, though don't always succeed, not to participate in reinforcing the very structures of power and inequity that the BDS movement is trying to address. Nevertheless, as progressive people who are part of a social justice movement, we should model the change we want to see in the world. We all need to speak out to make sure that everyone's full humanity is respected in all cases and at all times. It is both an ethical imperative and a strategic one to speak out against anti-Semitism if you hear it. This movement is hurt any time a truly anti-Semitic statement is made, just it is when we perpetuate systems of privilege as Jews or as Christians that we need to dismantle to win. To that end, I offer a challenge to you all as Christians. What can you all do to confront and address Christian hegemony in the world and on our work organizing for justice? I have frankly been surprised about the lack of this conversation, and I hope to see organizations like Friends of Sabeel acknowledge, unpack, and seek to address Christian privilege, much in the same way we at Jewish Voice for Peace are doing with Jewish privilege. Bringing in a Jew to talk is no replacement for doing the hard work of examining the legacy and current realities of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Christian communities and Christian dominance in our culture. For example, this could look like doing study groups about the legacy of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Christianity. It could look like workshopping ways that Christian dominance manifests in our media and educational systems. Reflecting on, have you ever been given a school vacation during Christmas or Easter when you're not given paid vacations on Ramadan or Jewish high holidays? Have you ever been to City Hall when there's a Christmas tree or a nativity scene inside? On top of these reflections, I can imagine your communities working to support and encourage each other to ensure that as you do your work advocating for Palestinian human rights in ways that do not rely on anti-Semitic ideas. I'm running out of time, but I want to offer a couple examples. A Jewish Voice for Peace Philadelphia really recently put together a curriculum on anti-Semitism and offered a helpful chart that has examples of clear criticism of Israel, ways that you can have that same criticism while relying on anti-Semitic ideas, even unwittingly, and ways that are truly anti-Semitic way to say the same thing. So I won't be able to go through all the examples, but just in closing, I'll offer one. For example, you could say, Israel has a repeated and ongoing record of human rights offenses. Clear. A way you could say that while unwittingly pulling on anti-Semitic stereotypes, Israel is a worse human rights violator than most or all other countries. Or a true anti-Semitic statement, Israel is the root of the world's problems. One other example, because I think they're helpful. In this issue, as in so many, the corporate media provides a one-dimensional, sensationalized coverage, usually biased toward whatever side the US government is backing when they cover it at all. A way to say that, relying on anti-Semitic sentiment even unwittingly, the media controlled by Zionists never talks about the plight of Palestinians. A truly anti-Semitic way to say it, Zionist control of the media is part of a vast web of Zionist power over banks and world governments in their conspiracy to rule over humanity. It is important to be mindful about the ways that we talk about the issue and ensure that we are not replicating oppressions as we seek to end them. I want to reiterate that personally, I find this to be an extremely small problem, much smaller than the issues of Jewish privilege and Islamophobia that are more dominant issues in our movement to address. May we have the courage to not stay silent, but to be able to look back at the time that we are spending now in pride for how we as Christians and Jews together manifested the most basic ethical tenet of our faith. What is hateful to you, do not do to others. May we be part of the transformation of a painful history of Christian anti-Semitism and of Jewish trauma by working together to realize justice, equality, and freedom, not just for Israelis and Palestinians, but for all of us. My work alongside Christians is an important challenge to those dangerous and disempowering messages I learned growing up. I no longer believe Jews are inevitably alone in the world, and in fact, quite the opposite. I now see just how much we are there for each other.
Trying to keep track of time. Yes. This evening promises to be very interesting because we want to talk about dialogue. And the people to have the dialogue are two people who have never met before, but who in fact have a lot in common. I have always felt, as a Palestinian, that the Palestinian narrative has never been really spoken. That we were the poor, voiceless, the forgotten, the neglected. I think I speak for all Palestinians when I say that our view of with Zionism has been marked from the beginning by the feeling that we were absent from the picture. We were not players in the game. The very beginning was a land without a people for a people without a land. To this day, I feel that a lot of the interest and attention in the Palestinian question comes in large part because we are the adversary, the counterpoint, the other to Jews who are, in fact, important in Western eyes. This is how many Palestinians experience reality, and if I don't begin with that, I think I will not be sharing with you the truth. Most Palestinians feel that we have been always put aside and marginalized. It also happens to be a fact of history that we are part of the Arab and also Muslim world that is living through the worst period of its long history, through its own Middle Ages, through its own period of powerlessness and vulnerability, so that our supposed friends and allies all too often are our worst enemies and have no real interest in it, and we are left alone. So the first thing that comes to my mind is to enter into dialogue with the other. We must begin by declaring our narrative, who we are, what is our story, making sure that our voices are heard. And to a very large extent, thanks to people like you, and thanks to courageous Jewish voices on the other side, our story is beginning to be heard. Our narrative is beginning to be visible and to be part of the discussion. One of the problems of Christian Zionism, the topic of this conference, is that it totally ignores and doesn't deal with Palestinians at all, and certainly not Palestinian Christians. However, when we do find our voice, and when we do thrust our presence in their midst, they fall apart because they have no coherent theology, encompass and address and speak to us. So our narrative becomes a powerful force in and of itself. But then I personally come to a second problem, that our narrative, which basically is a confrontation with Zionist power, backed by the powerful West, faces a second problem. And this is a little tricky, but I have to say it, and this may give us the ability to truly dialogue. For Palestinians and for people in the Arab world generally, when they think of Jews, they don't only think of the power that they have, they also think of deception. Part of it may be a result of a historical memory from the time of the Prophet, when he had a number of treaties with Jewish tribes, and Muslims felt he was betrayed. They didn't live up to their obligations. So part of the historic memory of Muslims and Islam, Jews can be deceptive. They don't tell the truth. And as I said, this also shades into anti-Semitic stereotypes, but has to be acknowledged. For me and for others in the peace and justice movement who care about dialogue and who want to engage in dialogue, we face the danger of the two narratives approach. The two narratives approach basically says, just like you have your narrative, which ought to be heard, so also the Israelis have their narrative, which needs to be equally heard. It's a question not of right and wrong, but it's a question of two rights. So good so far. Then this slowly shades into a false symmetry that implies that the two are the same or are of equal weight. That the occupier and the occupied, the oppressor and the oppressed, the powerful and the weak are basically the same. And that we should listen to both, and we should try to understand both, and we should try to bring them both together and sort of split it down the middle. And this is the form of almost physical, mathematical equations. You bring 5 Arab children and 5 Jewish children, and they sing one verse in Hebrew and one verse in Arabic of Kumbaya, and everything is fine because we have achieved balance and symmetry in a situation that is totally asymmetrical. So, for this reason, many of the efforts at peace and reconciliation become almost anathema, become themselves ways of perpetuating an evil and an oppressive status quo. How do we break out of that mold? I say that in the full confidence that there are two narratives. the Jewish people have suffered throughout their history, particularly from Christian anti-Semitism. Muslim and Middle Eastern countries, as there always have been. But the level, the persistence, the systematic, the theological, the institutional anti-Semitism that the Jews suffered from, and which culminated in the Holocaust, there is nothing like that. But having recognized that, how do we move forward? Well, initially, I thought that the best way to move forward is through universalism. I'm a lawyer, I'm a human rights activist, and I love the fact that the law, even bad laws, have this quality built into them of equality. The law is not a law unless it is applied, and applied equally to everybody. And if the law on its face says this law doesn't apply to everybody, well, then you can easily challenge it and see how oppressive and how wrong it is. The problem with apartheid is that while it was a legal system, it was a legal system that specified rights for different races differently. When I came back to Palestine after I finished worked a couple of years in New York, one of the first things I did was study the law, study Hebrew, join the Israeli Bar Association, and study the years through which Israel was ruling our lives as Palestinians, and showed how these laws were really being unequal and unequally applied, and how they have built in violations of human rights. I love the fact that there is something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which everybody can appeal. So universalism and values, a rejection of elitism and a rejection of privilege, for me was basic in my seeking justice and in my seeking dialogue. But then I actually had to move beyond that, because in the Middle East, like it or not, we live in tribal societies. We are different tribes. Each tribe has identity, has its history, has its priorities, and has its personality. A bland, one-size-fits-all universalism, however lawful and worthy, doesn't always address everything. After all, we Palestinians are insisting on our identity. Well, then how can we ever get into dialogue with the other? Then, because my time is short, I picked 3 elements that should be found if we want to move towards genuine dialogue and coexistence. There is empathy. Empathy. We need each other's stories. We need to try and walk in each other's shoes. We need to feel the pain of the other and join in their hopes and nightmares. Second, plurality. We must accept and embrace the fact that we are not all the same. While we are all equal, we are not all the same. We are different, and yet we can find ways in which we can complement each other or coexist with each other. And that plurality does not mean exclusivity. Plurality means equal, but we are all different. Third and finally, integrity. If we are going to seek peace, we must have integrity. The kind of lovey-dovey pretending there are no problems, pushing them under the rug, appealing and smiling at each other while we hide our true feelings and our true intentions is not a way to move. I am blessed and fortunate to have Jewish friends with whom I can speak with honesty and integrity, whom I respect me, to whose narrative I am open and who are open to my narrative, and who can work together with me towards a better future for everyone. I think this is where I'd like our dialogue this evening to go. Things that fall within these three categories, I think, will be useful and helpful. Things that don't, may be a problem.
This is not working. Now it is. Okay. Well, a lot to chew on. Let's start with the whole issue of authentic dialogue. Having been through so many dialogues, I just don't even like the word anymore. Dialogue has been a cover-up to delay and prolong. So you've given a few years, and empathy, what did we have here? We had, make them empathy, plurality of differences, and integrity. Okay, how do we break down? Here we got two people with commitments to justice. How do we get that down where the rubber hits the road at the local congregation and parish? What does that look like?
Well, you spoke very eloquently about anti-Semitism. Because I know how it is abused all the time. When I am confronted by a society that is immeasurably more powerful than me in every possible way, and that uses its power to exercise privilege at every level, freedom of movement, power, wealth, access, media, whatever, in every category, they are more powerful than me. And plain that any attempt to prevent or to curtail that privilege, they yell anti-Semitism. I say, wait a minute. Yes, you have suffered from anti-Semitism largely in the Christian West, but not from me. Why do I have to pay the price? And are you really afraid and vulnerable, or is this just an excuse?
I mean, for me, no. But, I think that I'll get to that, but I think the thing that I'm interested in your question about the dialogue is that, and as you were talking about the two sides, I was thinking about what a relaxing thing it would be if there actually were just two sides. There are so many sides. It actually would be a delight if there are sides and you could have a representative from each one and they could talk it out. But that's not the world we live in. We don't live in a world where there's two sides, right? You could get, in the Jewish community, we always have 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? And I think all the more so when it comes to this. So just one reflection on why I think the dialogue model of doesn't serve us anymore. Because, and I've started to think of it kind of akin, I don't know how many people in this room will follow me on this metaphor, between second wave feminism and third wave feminism. So there was a second wave interfaith moment where it was radical in and of itself for Jews and Christians and Muslims to sit at a table at all that didn't require proselytizing or, cursing, right? But that you could sit at a table and everybody would say each of their own things, and that was kind of it, and everybody was equal. And what we're at now, kind of like what third wave feminism does to second wave, if you're following that metaphor, if not, and listen to what I'm going to say, is that we're now in a moment, at least for me, from the Jewish side of the table, that I want to come down and say, we can't just sit here as I don't know. Is it back? Is it back? Okay. I'm just gonna okay. So that we can't come to the table as if we all have the same amount of power and privilege. And that part of what we're doing, and kind of when I'm excited about what we're building at JVP, and actually this summer we're having an inaugural gathering of the Interfaith Network for Justice in Palestine, where we're bringing together about 50 leaders of different faith communities, Abrahamic and not, to sit down at a table, not just for the kind of kumbaya experience that you described, but for an honest reckoning about the power and privilege we all hold and what it's going to take for us to kind of work together, right? So it's not just like we all say our different kind of blessing over the bread. Actual getting to work and rolling up our sleeves. And the title of that gathering is called Co-Resistance Before Coexistence. And that what that means is that in order to get to a place where there is a possibility for coexistence, we need to be in the process of co-resisting oppression together in all the ways that that looks. This moment that I think that we're in, where we're talking explicitly about, and in JVP, for us at Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP is our acronym, we explicitly say to all of our chapters and all of our members when they build campaigns and they're messaging for their work, we say guidelines that we encourage them along, and one of them is don't equate Israelis and Palestinians, like the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians, because it does damage possibilities of what we're going to be able to. The more that we try to say like it's equal, right? And I think this kind of, for me in the Jewish community, I'm embarrassed when it comes, and now I'm getting to your thing about the vulnerability, is that, what it does is it turns the Jews as the victims of a thing that they're actually the perpetrators of oppression against Palestinians. It's a very manipulative thing to do. And so you could think about it like in personal relationships where you're having a conflict and you did a wrong to you, and then you talk to them about it and they're offended and they're, and they like turn it around. No, you shouldn't have said anything to me about it, right? Like, or whatever. Like, just to try to wrap your head around what's happening is it does, and it's really problematic the way that in the Jewish community, for example, the question of the right of return, which is Voice for Peace pushes on, to another that doesn't agree about that, all of a sudden they're becoming re-victimized and we're going to be pushed into the sea, and it's like these fantasies, that conversation before it even starts. So I think it's actually it's manipulative and it's harmful, and so I think that part of it is like, at the same time, part of the manipulation isn't just the moment where they say like, oh, now it's about me again because you said something that offended me, but also that when you say, oh, I don't want a dialogue, then you become a kind of monster of incivility, have no tact and no, you just are rude because you won't sit down at the table. So you were kind of in a catch-22 there about that.
Okay, that's fascinating. I know from in the Middle East, they talk about a dialogue of life, of lived experience. I found that our cooperation and what JVP has done with our Presbyterian Church and what we're hopefully going to do with other denominations, that is an action by justice. Now, what we're seeing, the opposition getting more organized, throwing a lot of money at this. What are some of the things that we should be looking at, that we're going to be, the barriers that we're going to be encountering as we work on some of the of action and working together in the coming months and years?
Yeah, I appreciate what you said about co-resistance before because the thing about dialogue is when it becomes a substitute to action. Yeah. Becomes a nice way to for the oppressed to let off steam, and for the oppressor to feel, to assuage their conscience. We don't want that. We want action, joint action towards a against oppression. But I actually want to say that we are now at a moment where we can, in fact, move towards a better future, which I don't think we were able to do before. And let me explain this a little bit more. For many years, the two-state solution was a nice, easy out for both sides, as well as for the international community. You didn't really have to worry about Zionism and what does it mean and what does a Jewish state mean, because, look, we got it. Two states, one for Jews, one for Arabs, living side by side, everything is hunky-dory, fine. And for the Palestinians also, came almost out. We don't really have to deal with the hard issues because we are working our way towards a Palestinian state, and once we have a state, that sort of solves our problem. We have our identity, we have a flag, we have a passport, everything is fine. And of course, for the Arab world and for the international community, that was the best thing around. But after working more than 40 years and seeing what's happening, and after not only the evidence on the ground, but finally something snapped. Election when Netanyahu said, who are you kidding? It's not going to happen, not on. And all of a sudden there was an epiphany. Really? Well, if it's not happening, then where do we go from here? If Israeli Arabs, the Palestinians of Israel, are not going to count in elections, they are really marginalized totally. And if the West Bankers aren't going to have a state, and the Gazans, forget about them, we already have. And the refugees in the diaspora, they're not our problem. Then what? Where do we go from here? And the answers are not simple. And the crisis is not only a crisis for Israel. What does it mean to have a Jewish state with all these non-Jews around? A crisis for Palestinians. If we're not going to have a state, what are we going to have? What are we aspire to? What is our goal? What is our vision? Can we, in fact, exist in the land, the Holy Land, the whole of the land? And how? I'm not saying necessarily a one-state solution, but I'm saying what is going to be the nature of relations between Jews and non-Jews in the land? Whether it's in what's called Israel, whether it's in the occupied territories, whether they are in the diaspora. And that brings in a whole new conversation to get into a dialogue with you on it. How can we move forward? Not a grand political strategy, but what is it that we must work towards? What things do we like? What things don't we like?
Yeah, that's why I think I'm interested in exploring the co-resistance idea more, right? Because I think part of it is that sometimes you hear people hear the word resistance and they get nervous about what that means. But I think that part of the reason it appeals to me, and I think it's an important thing for us to start to explore as faith communities to be a part of, is that it's practice for coexistence in some ways, right? Like at JVP, for example, we don't take a position on a solution. partially because we think, largely because we believe that it's not our, as American Jews, largely advocating, like it's up to Palestinians to figure out. It's also because of the importance of the process. And so whatever it is that we're doing to get us to wherever we go to is going to inform what it's going to be like when we get there. Does that make sense? So like if we're the process to get us to whatever the solution is that allows justice, equality, and freedom for all people, the process that gets us there is one where people in privilege are challenged to understand how that power and privilege works and be in a process of relationship with people that they have power and privilege over, do things that we're seeing in Israeli society, refusing to serve in the military, right? For example, right? Of us, you know, there's different things in Israel which I feel like I can't totally being a Jewish Israeli, but like in the American Jewish context, there's other things that are akin of like non-participation, right? And I think that that's an important piece of like, what are the ways in which we are reaffirming the status quo in ways that we don't even mean to, right? And so, and how do we challenge ourselves to kind of do the kind of thing like of addressing, like I did in my remarks about privilege and the challenge of that and messages that I got growing up and how to unlearn them. So, and I think that it's also about taking leadership from Palestinians. I know for JVP, we just a few months ago endorsed the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So that happened in February 2015. So it took us.
Yeah, I thought you did already.
No, it just happened. And it was 10 years it took us, and to formally endorse the full call. Then it was about selective divestment, and I think that is part of the process too, right? Of like it took us that amount of time as an organization, as individuals, communities to be ready to do that, and so I think that then and I think was a huge amount of patience on the part of the Palestinian Boycott National Committee, leeway to be part of the BDS movement while not fully endorsing the call. So I feel like it's that part of that is together, but at the same time, our sleeves are rolled up in that co-resistance work in meaningful ways.
I have 7 other questions, but I'm going to turn to the audience questions and just put those aside. So, here we go. If both sides are not equal, this may be for Jonathan, or both comment. If both sides are not equal, then what are they? What is a better framework than the dual narrative?
What I meant by they're not equal is that the reality on the ground is that they're not equal.
There's no parity.
There is no parity between them. It's like a rapist and a victim. Yeah, at some level they are both human beings and ought to be equal. But you cannot approach the situation of the rape by saying, let me hear your point of view, and let me hear your point of view, and what brought you to this stage, and what brought you to this stage, and how, there's an ongoing rape taking place, and you must acknowledge that, and you must deal with it, rather than pretend that there is some kind of parity between them. But that they are equal, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think for me, the thing I would say is that there's not equality, there's a situation of oppression happening that needs to be remedied, right? And so that's, instead of a dual narrative, it's a how do we this ongoing issue of oppression.
Right. Next one, thank you. Interfaith dialogue is often used to prevent or slow down BDS. That work. What words of advice do you have to move forward in the churches?
If I'll just start is saying some of the most productive conversations I've had on this, and I've been organizing around this issue since 2001. I was raised a Zionist and changed my mind through a lot of hard work. And since 2001, I've been doing this activism as a Jew on this side, and I've never had more productive, more honest, more real conversations in the Presbyterian General Assembly that I've been at. I mean, boycott, I have to tell you, it's real. Like, in Detroit this past summer, people would stop me, because whatever. I spoke at a church, so a lot of people recognize my calls of the general. Stop me and just like want to sit down for like an hour and talk it out and really wrestling with what to do. And I know that is part of why I so wholeheartedly endorse BDS as a strategy. That's what gets to happen, right? And it was like before years we were trying to figure out what was the thing that was going to push people to have to really wrestle with their conscience and like try to work it out and have an honest conversation about how do we address this issue of oppression, and then the opportunity to have those conversations. And so I really believe that it's not about, it is about that. It is about it passing and winning because it is really effective, but at the same time, the process of getting there is hugely transformative. Communities, it's the same thing. And part of what I think we're doing is that in previous years at the Presbyterians, like the opposition thing was just Semitic to, call for BDS. But what it has moved that the starting place was the occupation must end, which has pushed the opposition to need to actually address the meat of the issues in a way that we haven't been able to have a tool to provide that pressure. And that's what the scale, right? It's like really out of whack. And what people like us do is bring the scale as far as pressure. We learned from South Africa. That's what we learned in the United States through the civil rights movement. That's why this strategy is so pressing. And so I think it's just pushing and pushing ahead because we get what we want. Honest conversation, honest reckoning with the issues.
One before I go back to the others. I think for me, it's really necessary now to bring another partner in, the Muslim community. How do we do that? Why are the Muslims missing here? And why are they often missing when we have our actions at the General Assemblies of the and the other? How can they be brought into this conversation? Do you see any progress coming?
Okay, I'll go back to what I previously said. The Muslim world today is going through its dark ages. And if there's any group that really feels vulnerable today, it's Muslims. On the world stage, their influence is very close to zero. In the United States, and I suspect in Canada also, they count for zero, very little. I think Christians, certainly Christian Palestinians, find their voice and work, but we really need to bring Muslims into the equation. We also need to bring Hamas into the equation. I know Hamas is not only demonized, but it also criminalized. You cannot offer any material help under the Patriot Act in the U.S. to a recognized terrorist organization is recognized as such. Just like the PLO used to be demonized and criminalized before. But if we want to approach this question, at least start by Hamas, by openly Hamas, by inviting Hamas into the conversation to be part of the process. Now, it is helpful that many Palestinians, and certainly almost all Palestinian Christians, don't put much weight on armed resistance. We really believe in nonviolence. I think I was told that it's probably the first community since the first century where the majority of Christians in a particular country really opted for pacifism in Palestine. The majority of Palestinian Christians today really believe that Christ teaches us not to use violence, which is amazing, and I think it makes the dialogue that much easier. But we need to bring Hamas into the picture. We need to tell them, come on, get on with it. We are willing to talk to you. We're willing to deal with you. And we're willing to co-resist with you. And we have better ways of resisting than shooting missiles with no warheads.
Well, the next question, I wanted to add that one before we got to this. Why do Palestinians keep electing Hamas, whose charter demands the destruction of Israel?
Okay. Actually, Palestinians haven't had a chance to elect anybody recently. Okay. I said Hamas into the equation. They accept or believe everything Hamas believes in. But just for the record, the Palestinian people, including Hamas, have a right to resist, including using weapons. I just think that'd be totally stupid and foolish to exercise it when they're dealing with Israel in this current situation, when there are so many better ways to fight together a better future. Hamas needs to change, and Israel needs to change big time. But we can't wait for them to change. We must start working towards from where we are now. And that is the hope. I could have easily said, I refuse to talk and deal with Israel until, at a minimum, it signs the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Never mind giving up its nuclear weapons. But I can't. I'll have to wait forever. It's not going to happen. I have Israel where they are now, with their craziness, with their phobias, with their fascism, and say, how do we deal with it? How can we move the situation forward?
Well, I don't want to say something about Hamas, but I do want to say something about, like, whenever that, and I don't mean necessarily any disrespect to the person who asked the question, but I'm going to question, why do Israelis keep voting in Netanyahu, who is such an egregious war criminal, who, it's like, the question is the of Israel. Netanyahu's whole campaign was about denying Palestinian identity, about war, massacre, denial of existence, right? Like, and he has infinite feels like almost infinite power to exercise what racist, xenophobic has on any given day. Very, very damaging.
Okay, thank you. As my friend once say, you're as subtle as a screen door in a submarine. Okay, next. My aunt and uncle are Zionists. One is Christian and the other secular Jewish. They've seen my activism and sympathy for Palestinians and say I'm anti-Semitic. What do I show them that I'm not?
I'm assuming this question is coming from a person who's Christian, not Jewish. But if I'm gonna, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I was gonna say, like, my family are also Zionists, and they also don't do, but that's a whole separate story. But I think I just want to reflect back on something that I said in my remarks. If the question, what do I do to show that I'm not anti-Semitic?
Yeah, what do I do to show them I'm not?
Right.
Anti-Semitic.
Right. So, on one level, it's not on you because it's a whole culture, like it's a strategy, right? As I said about the legislation that's now being proposed in the United States that, again, is based on the European definition of anti-Semitism, which then became the U.S. State Department's working definition of anti-Semitism, which now is being used in legislation. So it's a bigger problem than you can address in your own family system. So I just want to say that, like, to take the pressure off a little bit. Like, you can't, that is a large issue, right? So you're not going to be able to address the way that anti-Semitism and critique of Israel are conflated. And at the same time, I think that, as I said, there are, when people do ask me, like, what do I do when people say anti-Semitic? And I would say, well, are you? And I don't, and I don't want to give people a pass. I'm not giving anybody a pass on anything. none of it, we all have to do the work that we have to do to reckon with our own ways we are in the world and the systems that we're a part of and that we're influenced by. So if you're doing that work, you're less vulnerable to those accusations. And I think that that's real. I think it never gets easy, as a white person in the United States in these past year with everything that has happened around police brutality and, it's hard to reckon with those privileges and at the same time, it's just part of it, right? So I think it's less about what you can do to change them and what you're doing within yourself to be able to be centered about what is motivating you in this work, motivating you, and asking, because that's what, and like that thing of you need, you can't change how anybody else is going to feel, especially considering the governmental and institutional and all the ways that the is being reinforced to them. But if you can find in your own place, in your own way, to make peace with why and how, and you're doing this work, that's going to be your best way to continue to do it and to be in fellowship, right? So that's why these gatherings are so important, why organizations come together is so important, because you kind of feel like you're out there and people are grief. It's really important to have a community to support you. And so you can't change them. You can't change what people believe other than being more powerful in your work, being more impactful, and supporting yourself to be able to do it sustainably.
If they're a Christian, I have a very easy answer for them. And that is that Jesus, you have a great blessing. Blessed are you, evil things falsely against you, which means, very important, which means if they call you anti-Semitic and you're not, you got a big blessing there awaiting you. But if you are anti-Semitic, no blessing.
Next one. How do Christians confront the anti-Semitism found in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels of Matthew and John? Isn't that confrontation needed before we can have honest dialogue? I suppose that's probably for Jonathan.
Yeah.
Okay. We really need to deconstruct what anti-Semitism is. We really do. And anti-Semitism is a worldview, and it's personal that's aimed at all Jewish people. Its hallmark, the generalization. All of them are. They, in the collective, you see the other as an individual or as a human being. You see them as part of a collective. And when I gave my remarks and I mentioned how many Arabs and Muslims see Jews today, when you start with all of you, it's very easy to slide in anti-Semitism. How do you break it down? You begin to see individual Jewish people as human beings. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate people like Jewish Voices for Peace or Independent Jewish Voices and some very few Israeli Jews that I know. Not only do they help Palestine and Palestinians and the Palestinian cause, but because they help me and others not to be anti-Semitic. They help us to see Jewish individuals who, out of their own religious tradition, are saying, this is wrong, this is cannot be part of it. In fact, we have an obligation to oppose it. That's what breaks anti-Semitism. Not those who Israel, who, as was pointed out, some can be very anti-Semitic and support Israel. It's the real friend of Israel who, out of caring, says, what you're doing is wrong, is suicidal, is evil, whether it's suicidal or not, and I, as a Jew, cannot participate in it. So, they're doing their part, and Christians have a lot to answer for 2,000 years, 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. It's not just the Holocaust. And yes, some New Testament verses taken out of context have been used to fuel that anti-Semitism. And the fact that the early Christians expected Christianity to be nothing but a fulfillment and a continuation of Judaism. So the Jews who didn't accept the Messiah as being a problem, a theological problem, an aberration, needed to be taught. That is a problem. And yes, it needs to be confronted. But frankly, that's the number one problem facing us today. Not as Christians, Jews, not as people concerned with the Middle East. Much more dangerous is, for example, Islamophobia, as well as the huge mess of the Islamic world, even apart from ISIS and all the crazy fanatics. The Islamic world today is in a huge mess, and it desperately needs help, far more, at least for the time being, than I think Jews need to be protected from anti-Semitism. But that's my bias.
I totally agree, actually, and I think I have been shocked by, get invited a lot to speak at churches, and have just been horrified, frankly, by the Islamophobic comments that I get in interpersonal conversations afterwards. So I just want to highlight that I really think it's a really crucial thing, and in the Jewish world, I mean, it's really a very urgent issue, and I think one that is, primary for us to start to Jews and Christians together.
Next, in Canada, we are just completing a long process of truth and reconciliation with our First Nations people. Do you think a truth and reconciliation process would be helpful in Israel-Palestine, or what would you need to be helpful in the place of it?
Yeah, there's no question that truth and reconciliation is necessary, but that usually comes at the end of the conflict. Not now. I mean, after the event, the rape is finished and completed, and people need to be healed, then you talk about truth and reconciliation. But while it's in progress, you need to yank the fellow off of the woman and say, stop it, enough. Not let's have truth and reconciliation, everything else.
I think that summarizes it. So, we're going to delay truth and reconciliation for the time being. Okay, here's a good one. Can you speak to what you see in the future for Palestine?
That's yours.
That's yours.
Okay.
What do you see?
Okay. I think that what is going to come, what is going to happen, is going to be radically different. I think we need to prepare a major paradigm shift. And it is going to come, and I think it is going to be very dramatic and very quick, because something about events in Israel-Palestine, too much history is telescopic. Very small people. Of you who haven't traveled there in the last, 6 months, will be surprised how different things are. 2 years, 3 years, things change very, very rapidly and very quickly. So, if I can answer the implicit question, which is what kind of vision do I have, I would say we need, instead of trying to create or seek that vision and try and go sell it to people and make all sorts of compromises trying to make it happen, I think we need to point out the elements of that vision? What actual things do we want to see and work towards them? And I think of elements, I think of things like equality. I think of things like acceptance. I think of things like respect for human rights, human dignity, respect for international law. And I think of negative things, racism and violence and more weapons and more resort to coercion. I see this is what we need less of. We don't need more weapons there. You know, just remember when the situation in Syria was spinning out of control and more weapons. You give the rebels more weapons and more sophisticated. That's the last thing they need. Is the last thing the Middle East needs. The last thing Israelis or Palestinians today is more weapons so that they can fight and kill more and destroy more. So anything that goes away from weapons, away from racism, away from privilege, and more towards justice, more towards equality, more towards human rights, more just simple freedoms of movement, going back and forth, are things that we need to be working on and promoting.
Now see if you can get your head around this one. What would a dialogue between Hannah Arendt and...
Go for it.
I'm not really sure what to say to that question. I mean, it would be interesting.
Well, pretend you're Hannah Arendt.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I'd hate to be Hannah Arendt in that conversation.
I don't know. I wish that I could ask the person who asked the question more details about what they were asking, because I don't know that I know exactly how to answer the question without what's underneath it.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
You're going to take a pass.
Okay. Do you want to try to answer it?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about these situations, and I have to say, for my Israeli friends, anybody who really has a conflict and who is really a genuine, who happens to really, it's horrible. Her or his situation is much worse than mine. You know, I may be weak and oppressed and limited in many ways as a Palestinian, but if I was an Israeli with a conscience, it does not look good, and it's very hard to maintain your humanity in that situation. And that's, I think, true for Israelis than it is for, I don't know, maybe Canadians. At least they have BDS.
I'm going to throw one in here. How do you account for the dramatic growth of JVP over the past, well, year and then before that?
How do I account for it? Well, the truth is that every couple in this like ground of hell where Israel does appalling things in Gaza and our membership in JVP skyrockets. There's no more, I mean, that's the bare truth of it. It's gruesome and it's terrible, but that's how it's been. Every 2 years, we double in size, you know, and it's just been happening like that. It's not to say good work in between those years to, you know, and I think we do. You know, I think one of the things that accounts for what is going really well at JVP, I mean, part of it is that on staff, we have a very talented staff team that works really well together, which I think should not be, right? That like a highly functional, smart group of people that get along together and et cetera. But I think, which sometimes I think is invisible but that's clearly part of for those along with your coworkers. But I think the other piece is that JVP is moving on many fronts. We we have an interfaith program where we do the kind of building of interfaith work that we've talked about here. We have a campus program. We're building out support both for faculty. We just launched an academic advisory council. We sent, in our first week, 550 academics signed on to our academic advisory council. We also have a student program, building out a student network and building the leadership of young people. We have a congressional program. We just hired, our DC office just opened last week, and we now have a federal policy organizer in DC that's working to build our grassroots power there. We have an arts and culture program. We have an artist council that tries to bring cultural work and allow artists and cultural workers to bring their full selves into this movement. We have the rabbinical council that, doing work to transform Jewish communities and change communities from within and build alternative Jewish communities, right? We have a strong communications program that thinks about how to say what we want to say in the ways that people can hear it, in the ways that people to our left and to our right will feel like JVP is a home for them. And that's an art, not a science. And so I think it's because there's not a magic bullet to this problem, and it's going to take pushing on all these different fronts in order to see the change that we want. And I think JVP also, is partially that for the Jews that come, it is because every 2 years something atrocious happens and it's a light bulb goes off, right? For that person that okay, they can't make the excuses anymore. I do have a lot of support from the Arab and Palestinian community because I think it is encouraging for folks that we are doing the work that we're doing. So we are taking seriously now that we are in this new phase of growth. I mean, when I started 4.5 years ago, I was the 6th employee. We're about to have that's a huge amount of growth just of our staff, right? We started this summer with 40 chapters. We now have closer to 70. We're just growing we now have more Facebook likes than any other organization, including AIPAC, working on this issue in the United States. Our social media is, and so we are growing, and I think we are thinking really carefully about what our responsibility is to support and sustain our allies in the movement as we grow, because I think there are elements of the Jewish privilege question that have led to us growing in the way that we have, that not to undermine that we're doing things really well, and that's something that JVP is working on, and that's one of the ways that we're thinking about doing that sustaining and supporting of allies in the movement, is doing more training and skill shares with other organizations so that we can share some of the things that we've seen to be successful.
Thank you. The penultimate question, next to last. What effect on the Palestinian situation comes from the position of a government like Canada's, the current one, that openly bases its foreign policy on Christian Zionism?
At some level, I think for many Palestinians, this is not surprising, because Canada was always viewed as sort of following the US lead, and those who follow Canadian politics at all realize that Canada has been even more right of whatever the most conservative elements in America speak. So at some level, it's not surprising. At another level, it's deeply, deeply disappointing. I mean, my own experience yesterday was just, it's really hurtful, because I always think of Canada as being a nice place, nice people, good people. I don't think of them as part of the empire. I don't think of them as part of this evil, oppressive force in international affairs, and yet, I mean, under the present government, that appears to be the case. What happened there? They did the Tel Aviv thing on me. They kept me for close to 3 hours, questioned everything, took and I believe photocopied all my papers, insisted that I opened the computer, asked for my passwords, and it was just a horrible experience. I never, ever expected anything like that in Canada. But it happens.
Shame on Canada.
The Royal Canadian welcome. Sorry. Okay, last question. That was a penultimate.
Oh, sorry.
Bonhoeffer talked about penultimate ethics, remember? Okay, what would you recommend for those of us who are here as we leave tonight to reflect on of what are the priority things we need to be doing as we leave this place tonight and then as we go tomorrow? Whether it's Friends of Sabeel or whoever. What are the priorities in front of us now of what people should be thinking about they have to sink their teeth in to do and take home?
Okay. Yeah, I am the organizer, that's true. Campaigns, campaigns that have a clear target, meaning a target that a target means a person or institution that, like a person, an actual thing that can make the decision that you want to be made. And you have a campaign, right? That's what, like, the Presbyterian Church has modeled for us, huge soda stream victories that we've had. We need campaigns that push and push. I think, the conferences that Sabeel puts on are so valuable because they're like a deep dive into political analysis development and understanding the issues. But then it needs to go to the next step of organizing, campaign building. The U.S. Campaign to End the Israeli is an organization that provides really good skill training for that and campaign development. But I think action campaigns that are strategic, that give you an opportunity to tell the story. That's what I find the most effective, is where you could, in a sentence, if somebody asks you the campaign you're running, you get to describe part of what, right? If it's a campaign, it should be able to be in a sentence. It should be clear why it's compelling, whether it's a consumer boycott, it's a resolution in your pension that you might have that might be invested in companies, right? There's a million types of campaigns, but I think that's the kind of thing that pushes the things forward, that force people to decide which side they're on, that allows you to do the educational things that you want to do that are a means towards an end.
I would definitely echo your recommendations, but I would also add a very positive note. Things are changing. Things are changing. We should not at all. I think that we need to zero in or target very specific. We should have very specific targets, and for me, I think 3 targets that are very, very essential, which have to be targeted. One of them is the Muslim community and the whole issue of Islamophobia. They really need your help. Many of them are only first and second generation immigrants, still carry within themselves the fear of political activism and Islamophobia, and the legislation that followed 9/11 has not helped them. They feel vulnerable. They need to be supported, and we need to reach out to them. That's one community. Second community, evangelical Christians. They are changing very rapidly. They need to be addressed, approached, confronted in love, and brought. And of course, the Jewish community, and we have excellent allies there that we need to work with. These 3 communities, I think, are key to moving forward. And it's not victories. It's nice to have little successes, and it's nice to have impacts that are tangible, that give you the fuel to continue.
And I would add, from the U.S., we need to get younger and get more youth in. Yeah, we're working on it. And in the United States, we're working hard to reach out and make more connections with the minority, African American and Hispanic. And for you in Canada, issue is important to bring in. Well, I want to thank our two speakers, the dialogue tonight. And you've been a great audience. So we didn't get to all the questions. I apologize for that. We didn't get to all of them, but our time is up. And thank you for being so patient. And I want to turn it over, I think, to then maybe to Robert, the omnipresent Robert.
Okay. We'd invite you. This seemed to be a really important song this morning, and it seems appropriate again at the end of the day and the end of our time with you. It's a quote from A.J. Musty. There's peace, the way to peace, peace is the way. And Jim took this and did an entire song. I invite you to stand and sing from the beginning with us. Jim? I think just the first verse once, two in one key and two in the next.
There's no way
to peace.
I have no mic. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Turn up the volume,
Turn up the volume.
The master volume. Testing 1, 2, 3. It's okay. There's no way to peace.
Peace is the way.
The strength of love and
justice will bring the peaceful day. The power of forgiveness will wash the blood away. There's no way to peace. Peace is the way. And there's no way to love. There's no way to love. Love is the way to feel each human heartbeat in all the world today, to overcome all hatred and melt the tears away. There's no way to love. Love is the way. And justice, there's no way to justice. Justice is the way to honor creation. There's say to domination with freedom. Jimmy, I lost my voice. To justice, sorry. Justice is the way. We're both having trouble. No.
There's
no way to peace. Peace is the way. The strength of love and justice will bring the peaceful day. Power of forgiveness will wash the blood away. There's no way to peace. Peace is the way. Sorry. Robert, thank you. I think you can be seated for a moment, folks.
Well, this has been a very a long and fabulous day, as far as I can tell, and a wonderful close to the evening. Because it's been such a long day, and the planning committee knew that we began at 8:45 this morning, we thought we'd let you sleep in tomorrow. So tomorrow we start at 9. I'd like to see Dawn, Lynn, and Wendy afterwards. Because it's a public event, we will give you the opportunity to make an offering towards the baskets on the way out, if you like. And finally, this conference has been blessed. What started out as a wonderful coincidence because the Strathdies were coming to Vancouver to play here tomorrow evening, and they offered to do all, and because they've got a gig on tomorrow, they can't be here tomorrow. But what a been to have Jim and Jeannie with us. Harold, can I call you up to say a few words? Thank you.
Well, I won't prolong this, but to say that I got an email from Robert about 2 months ago that said, I've just heard that there are some folk called Strathdy who say they would be available to do the music, and I emailed back within 20 seconds saying, grab them. Jim and Jean, we've known each other since we were working together in the great yellow and white striped tent at the World Council Church as 1983. It's been a great privilege to be able to work with you here. Blessings to you on your fairly tired way tonight.
But your work is not done. Would you send us out with one more, please?
That's unexpected, but we invite you to stand and join us on There'll Be Sunshine in the Morning. Because we are people of hope, a Palestinian friend. Now just, again, back it up and turn it off, please, Barb, thank you. A Palestinian friend, it might have been Jonathan that said, I remember, but we were with someone lately, I think we asked, how do you keep going? How do you have hope? And they said, it is our duty as Christians, that is what we're called to have, is hope. So may we all be fed by this conference and go forward with the hope that we are called to have.
And there'll be sunshine in the morning. There'll be sunshine in the morning. There'll be sunshine in the morning. Sunshine in the morning, one of these days. And freedom will come to all my sisters. Freedom will come to all my sisters. To my brothers. Freedom will come to all my brothers. To my children. Freedom will come to all of children. Freedom to all God's children. Freedom to all God's children. One of these days. And justice like a mighty river. Justice will flow like a mighty river. Sing it again now. Justice will flow like a mighty river. Hallelujah. Justice, mighty river. Justice like a river. Justice like a river. One of these days. And love shall live in every heart. Love shall live in every heart. We'll sing it now, Lord. Shall live in every heart. it out now. Love shall live, free heart,
Yeah.
love in every heart, one of these. And surely someday peace shall come to every nation. Peace shall come to every nation. Oh, singing now, peace shall come to every nation. One of these days, hallelujah, peace shall come to every nation. Peace to every nation. Just as there'll be sunshine in the morning, and there'll be sunshine in the morning. Singing now, there'll be sunshine, sunshine in the hallelujah. There'll be sunshine in the morning. Sunshine